All right, here we go. Three, two, one. Welcome back to a special edition of the Public Works Podcast. We got the usual suspects here. My name is Joseph Blackman, and we have our dear friend of the family, Shane Silsby. Shane, say what's up to everybody.
What's up, team? Hello, Joe. Thanks for all your efforts with the Public Works Podcast. You're continuously doing a great job and providing good content. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I've been seeing you all over LinkedIn. You're at like every event up and down the coast of California. I've been seeing you on Capitol Hill. You're like Carmen Sandiego. Where on earth is Shane Silsby? So give us a brief rundown of what you've been up to lately. I've seen some state capitol stuff, and we'll dive into some of these more these topics topical. But just tell us where you've been at. Where have the roads led for Shane lately?
Yeah, a little bit across the country. Last time we talked on the pod, I was on Capitol Hill, and I was kind of in between. Right at my first week there was kind of with the American Society of Civil Engineers. We were pushing out information on the infrastructure report card, then flipped over and was supporting American Public Works Association with their policy priorities. And I think we talked a little bit about what was going on with the ASCE side, meeting with representatives of the Senate and the House. And then on the public works side, it was a little bit more with committees and groups, a little less with individual members. So we met with a House Finance Committee to talk about some flood insurance stuff. And then we met with House Transportation and Infrastructure committee staff. We met a little bit with U.S. Department of Transportation staff. Things like that. So it's trying to get a little bit more of the overall policy and the administrative flair on what's going on with the budget and operations in DC.
Sure. And you did some stuff on the state level also?
Yeah, on the state side, we have a group that is put together for advocacy in California. And so we're reviewing all of the bills that are coming through this cycle and prepping for our legislative visit day later on this year, which we might chat about. So what I do is I help as part of the team review all the bills from public works or public sector perspective, and then offer recommendations on should we support this bill, should we oppose this bill, should we watch it, should we ask for amendments, things like that for items that affect public works.
Sure. And then another thing, what I think is cool about what you do is the Olympics. Like you're a part of something in regards to the Olympics that are coming to California in a couple of years. Tell us some more about that.
Yeah, I've been trying to support mostly cities with prepping for venue selection or implementation of venue infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, a venue is the place where that Olympic event is held. And so the Olympics are so big now that they're not all held in one stadium.
Yeah.
So it gets spread out into different infrastructure arenas or fields or whatever it is to do those venues.
Okay. Let's go ahead and wrap up this DC trip. Like you said, you did 2 weeks out there. Your first week was with ACEC on the engineering side. We talked about that. But the second week was public works. Tell us kind of what the tempo is day to day for the whole week, like how many meetings you had, how many steps you got that day, how many, what it looks like. And then also tell us kind of what the meetings were about and then what you were looking to get done in those meetings.
Yes, a lot of steps. As we move back and forth between all the congressional buildings and different buildings that have administrative functions in them. So real quick, one of the things we were talking about with the House Finance Committee was the National Flood Insurance Program. And that always has funding challenges because it has to be reauthorized, renewed every year or every 2 years. And people are always thinking like, well, why are we paying for this? Why does the federal government pay for this? And the challenge is we have floodplains all over the country, and there are structures that are built in floodplains. And the National Flood Insurance Program basically provides a subsidy for people's insurance that they pay for those structures. And so that's important because there isn't enough money to go and mitigate and remove all those people from the floodplain or do the flood control projects either at the local level or with the Army Corps to change where the floodplain is to pull those people out. And so the rates would be extremely high and people just wouldn't be able to afford to live in those houses except for the National Flood Insurance Program. So that's why that's important. And I think there's alignment there. It's just, it sometimes gets politicized or people have different approaches to that. And then we were meeting with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee, as I mentioned, and that is, so you have the Senate Environment and Public Works side, and then you have the House Transportation and Infrastructure. Those are kind of the two legislative committees, congressional committees that talk about infrastructure and put forward funding proposals to the rest of Congress for infrastructure. And so we're talking to them about a couple things. One, on the ASCE side, we're talking about the report card and how the nation's infrastructure went from like a C- to a C, largely because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And if we don't continue to fund that, then there'll be a snapback and it'll cost people more because of infrastructure. And of course, the infrastructure gets older every year. And we're talking about roads, bridges, dams, all that stuff. And then it costs eventually more money to repair that. So we're talking about that as a data point. And then from the public works side, we're discussing the need for continued infrastructure for streamlining on the process standpoint, project delivery, and then how the industry is affected on the emergency management side, because public works are first responders. So, all of those efforts. And on the infrastructure side, there's a bit of a political twist that's being placed on what we call infrastructure. And there's less of a focus or less of an interest at the federal level to fund things that are linked to climate resilience, disadvantaged communities, things like that. And so part of what we're talking about is, well, we're not here really in public works to say what the federal government wants to call infrastructure, but these are the base elements of what we maintain for as public works agencies, and they need to receive funding. So that's kind of there with the House Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee. And then the US DOT, Department of Transportation, was the other one that was interesting. And kind of relaying the same thing to them, that we need to get the release of grantees, people that have been awarded grants, but not have received their money. And there's a holdup of about 3,200 grant projects that were selected, but have yet to be funded by the federal government. And so we were saying, look, we need to get an infrastructure bill. We need to continue to support that, but we also need to get these grant awardees their funding for, they put in money at the local level. We need to do that. So there was much debate about that subject.
Sure. And when you leave these meetings, what's usually the general sentiment? Like, what's the feeling of leaving the DOT meeting versus the infrastructure meeting or committee meeting? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel like they heard you, that they're going to get something done? You feel like they're going to drop everything and get it done? Or like, kind of what's the, like, should you be happy leaving the meeting? Like, what was the general sentiment outside of the meeting?
That's a good question. They're not going to drop everything and accommodate our requests, although they should in some cases. It's just part of information gathering that goes into the big puzzle. And you don't always know when it's going to have influence and when it isn't, because there are other special interest groups potentially on the other side of an issue. But, for APWA, that could result in, writing a letter with more specificity on some of these things, supporting or opposing bills that come up either in alignment with our industry or out of alignment. So those are kind of the after effects. You don't always know. I mean, you sometimes get a feeling when you're talking to these groups if they're really engaged or not, or if there's alignment or not. So you can have a couple things happen. This is going to sound crazy, but you can have alignment on an issue, and you can have somebody that's engaged, or you can have somebody that's engaged but you're not aligned on the issue. Then you can also have alignment on an issue with somebody's not engaged, where you have not alignment and not engagement. So it depends.
That's marriage too.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? And then sometimes about compromise there, right? So what we try to do as technical advocates is provide sometimes facts, statistics, or anecdotes from the local level that might try to help to change their perspective on something. Right.
Gotcha.
So if they said, well, we should just move all this to the local level, why should the federal government be involved in any of this stuff to repair a bridge or whatever? Okay, I understand that as a kind of an implementation perspective. But if you move the responsibility, for example, from the feds to the state, but you don't move the money from the feds to the state, now you've just shifted a responsibility without the funding to address it. And in many cases, especially on the grant side, for mid-sized to smaller cities and counties, they're trying to go for a grant because it's a project that's much larger than their budget could ever handle. So moving more responsibility to them doesn't really help, right? And then what I think gets lost in the whole mixture on infrastructure is the money that's being used to award grants or even being considered in these discussions comes from the tax base of the people that live in these cities and counties. So all they're really doing is asking for some of that money back to pay for public infrastructure. And that's why it gets challenging about if it gets politicized or it gets used for a different purpose that's not supporting the local community. That's where things get a little bit out of alignment sometimes.
Gotcha. Anything else that I guess popped up, came to mind in regards to wrapping up the DC trip, like sentiments, thoughts, some things that you're excited about from your trip?
There were impacts from the cuts to federal staff in the second part of the trip. In the first part, when we were dealing with the congressional offices, they were not affected necessarily by staffing cuts. But in the second part of the trip, when we're dealing with folks from the administration or from a federal agency, those cuts come into play. And part of where that comes in is trying to get approval of those federal grants, right, that we talked about. That, there just aren't enough people sometimes to do some of that work because they were cut. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. Yeah, but that's about it. More to come. We'll go into the budget process. I think we'll talk about that, but
sure,
that's kind of the wrap up on the trip.
Okay.
Advocate and hope that it makes a difference.
Gotcha. So the FEMA cancellation of the BRIC program. Tell us more about it. Give us what FEMA is or what they're supposedly do, and then also the BRIC program, what that's about, and then tell us about why it got canceled and kind of the fallout from that.
Yeah, that's a good one too, and it's a really interesting case study because FEMA, being the Federal Emergency Management Administration, is really tasked with providing resources to get ahead of natural disasters or to provide support, after declared emergencies and natural disasters. So that's a really important agency. And the challenge is year after year, we're having more and more billion-dollar disasters than the prior year. Some of it is we're having more disasters. The other part of it is they're happening with greater impact. And then the final thing is everything that gets impacted costs more, right? Houses cost more, whatever. So all of the things that get impacted cost more. So every year we have more and more billion-dollar disasters. So when FEMA, which is a target of recent discussions, there was a discussion about them actually getting removed as an agency. There can be many points of feedback about, is the agency efficient? How is it getting money out, like post-hurricane events or things like that, which I had direct experience in people not getting their money quickly from FEMA post-disaster. So there were definitely room for improvement, but eliminating the agency could potentially eliminate post-disaster relief. I mean, those are the people that came, in California, we had the Los Angeles fires. Those are the people that bring their resources and expertise to a disaster, right, to help mitigate the issue. So that's a challenge. And then their program called BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure for Communities, was actually established by the Trump administration in 2018. When you ask me why it went away, that's why it's a bit difficult, because it's the same group that set it up. But so there's two things: is why did it go away, and then what did it do? Well, I think the only thing we can put down as a reason why it went away is just to save money, because the administration is trying to save money to pay for a tax cut bill, which affects the budget discussion. But that's really the only why. Nobody ever gave a why to many of these cuts. It just started happening. The challenge with the BRIC program is that it tries to help mitigate or make the infrastructure more resilient. So when those natural disasters happen, they're less impactful, or the infrastructure is not impacted because it's been hardened or it's been raised to a different elevation or something's happened to make it more resilient. And the note on that is that I can't remember what the term was here. Okay, so the National Institute of Building Sciences reported that there's a $6 return on investment for every dollar spent on these types of efforts for resilient infrastructure. Basically meaning it costs you, just being simple about it, it costs you 6 times the amount to replace everything, repair and replace and deal with floods and all that stuff than it does just to harden it in the first place.
Yeah.
So the program has legitimate benefits, and I'm always in favor of infrastructure or federal programs that have a return on the investment, right? So you send your tax dollars and a good decision is made to do something that gives you a return on that investment, especially if it helps your local community. So that's good. The challenge is with what happened with FEMA and the administration and canceling the BRIC program is they went back, and this is a bit unusual, they went back 4 years to the beginning of the BRIC program and canceled everything from now all the way back 4 years. Well, depending on your thoughts about it, you might think, oh, what's the big deal? Well, that program was awarding about 400 projects per year to all states all across the country and territories. And so if you look at 400 projects per year over 4 years, that's 1,600 projects, and then canceling it before the 5th year, that's 2,000 projects. So you can either say 1,600, 1,600, or 2,000 projects are impacted by the cancellation of this program. And the 1,600 projects that were canceled were all selected, right, to be awarded the grant, meaning they were great projects. Right? They were protecting infrastructure. So that's a challenge. And there's been, I think, bills trying to be created and legislation passed to restore that program because it was so impactful. But I don't think there'll be the votes to do that. So that's the challenge with BRIC, affecting all 50 states negatively, Democratic and Republican states, but now that program's effectively gone.
Okay. All right. So the release of the federal fiscal year 26 skinny budget. Explain to the listeners what a skinny budget is or what a chubby budget is, and then tell us more about the FY26 skinny budget.
Yeah. So it's called a skinny budget because it's all about cuts and proposing less spending than the prior year. Nobody ever calls it a chubby budget, Joe, but it's given this term of skinny budget because of the strategy it's taking as part of the budget process. So in this budget, there's a proposal to bring back or make permanent the 2017 tax cuts from the last time that Trump was in the administration. And then that when you do a tax cut bill, this is what I think sometimes people don't understand. When you do a tax cut action at the federal government, you have to pay for that somehow because the federal government costs money to run. Any government, any business costs money to run. So if you reduce your revenue coming in by reducing taxes, you still have those expenses to cover, generally speaking. Although even if you cut a little bit, whatever, you still have a gap to cover. So you have to actually fund that with something else, even though you're because you're cutting your revenue. So it's a great political game to say you're cutting taxes, but effectively you're reducing revenue into your federal government that provides all the services. So one of the other things in the budget, even though it's cut back on other expenses, it has asked for money to pay for tax cuts, which sounds weird, but you need money to pay for a tax cut. It's asked for major increases in defense spending and border security funding. And to do that, it's also asked for a $4 trillion debt ceiling hike. So when you project these out long term, your deficit level is going to go up because you have less revenue and you've just added all these expenses for things that don't necessarily have a direct return on investment. Like, investing in your military, that's great. Nobody would be against that, but you're not in a wartime. So you're just pushing your money up and you're sacrificing other things. And so they're trying to offset that with all these deep federal spending cuts. That's why it's called a skinny budget. It doesn't mean that overall the funding amount is much less than the prior year. It's just the way they're going about it. So that's the high level on the skinny budget. And those are the elements that kind of make up that discussion.
Okay. What's next for the federal government?
So the big thing for the federal government is they'll be working on this budget. So the president puts its budget forward. The House just put forward a budget reconciliation program that looked at, I think I have those numbers, we look at eliminating 1.7 trillion in federal spending. So we talked about trying to reduce some of that federal spending. And it says mostly through Medicaid and food stamp cuts, but it would then deliver that 4 trillion in new and extended tax cuts. So the president puts his plan out first, then Congress responds to that, and the House goes first. So this is what the House is doing. And so that bill has gone out, and then I think that passed by a margin of 215 to 214. So it was really close by only 1 or 2 votes in the House. And then it goes to the Senate next. And this is what's going to happen all during the summer and the budget process. This is the big thing happening in DC right now is the budget. And then it goes to the Senate. And if they come up with a plan, then it goes back to the House. All that swirls back and forth to try to have that all done by September 30th, because the new federal budget goes out October 1st. One of the things in there that we're trying to advocate for is maintaining infrastructure funding. Okay, so the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was approved by Congress for 5 years, has been administered for 4 years, and we have 1 more year to go. We have the 5th year, and that's part of this budget. So we're advocating not to cut that funding, which has already been approved by Congress and already had funding appropriations allocated. That's the big thing for us, and that can go any number of directions. It can get caught up in this whole federal spending reduction strategy. So that's the challenge right now from the public works side, is we're watching these things that happen with the budget and then trying to advocate where we can, or maybe we write a letter, or maybe we call congressional members or do an action alert to try to mitigate something that's going wrong, or to try to support something that's going right in the budgetary process.
Okay. California's APWA Legislative Day and preparation process. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so we've been talking about the federal level for most of the call, and the other thing, by the way, people are prepping for is midterms, right? The midterms are the term 2 years after presidential election. That election is called a midterm election, the middle of the presidential term. So that's the other thing that's kind of swirling at the federal level. But at the state level, we have a lot that we need to do for advocacy. So we're in the West, Arizona being a state with a lot of expansion capability, California being the biggest state by population with 10% of the country's population. We have a lot of bills to review here. And so APWA, the California chapters, have a legislative advocacy committee that I'm part of, where we review all those bills. I think every cycle there's 3,000 plus bills. And so we try to pare those down by categories, and then I review those, as I think I said earlier. And that all leads into what we would do at the Legislative Visit Day, which APWA partners with ASCE. And we go to Sacramento right now. That date is scheduled for September 3rd, where we go and advocate on several issues, which could be like flow down of those federal dollars through the state process. It could be support or opposition for those bills. It could be another issue affecting the public works industry, like environmental streamlining. anything like that, that we build those talking points out, and then everybody that goes to that, we send them out to speak to the state legislature about those issues. And that's what the legislative visit day is. And everything I mentioned is how we prepare to do that.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, I guess in closing, so what is next for Shane? And then I'll go into what's next for me.
Yeah, well, I'm going to continue to watch what's happening at the federal level. Obviously, I'm tracking these bills in the state of California here more locally. But I think we'll know fairly soon at the federal level which way we're headed on infrastructure, and that'll affect, kind of my daily basis, what I do and how I help the cities and counties that I'm working with. Then we're going to head out to the American Water Works Association conference, you and I, right, in mid-June. So we'll be there, and I think we're going to do another session there and talk about some things, and then we'll end up, I think, at PWX later in the year in Chicago presenting. So heads down in between that, and then heads up to go to a few of those events and continue to try to educate and provide expertise.
Yeah. I guess next for me, like you talked about, I'll be seeing you at ACE. ACE is probably one of the biggest water conferences in the country. I went last year. The last year's one was in Anaheim. And it was a good event. A lot of people met a lot of new connections. And, I kind of felt like this would be a show that I go to every other year. But there's been some business deals that I've had kind of on the cusp. And those are, going to those shows are kind of usually primed for pushing those over the edge into the end zone. So I'll be there just shaking babies and kissing hands and doing the whole deal. Really excited about PWX in Chicago. I love a good deep dish pizza. You and I, we have a speaking engagement together there. We put in an abstract and we got our abstract accepted. We're going to be talking about all the finer things of public works in more of a interactive format. So I'm excited to roll that out. So if you're listening and you're going to be at PWX, come on out to our talk and don't be afraid to come up to us and say, hey, I want to help out or want to be a part of it. So I'm excited about that.
And I don't know if you want to dig into that a little bit more, Joe, but our session is a bit unique, right? We're going to offer people an opportunity to be on, a podcast or a LinkedIn Live for the first time, right? If they've never done that, they're going to get a chance to have that opportunity at our event through a live element. It'll
be live in front of all of our I guess engage or connections on LinkedIn, which can be into the thousands, and then also whoever's going to be in the room will be potential participants. So I'm excited for the format. I'm excited to to see the energy behind it, and of course excited to just continue to educate and advocate for our industry.
For sure. I was going to send you a note based on, since we're going to be in Denver. David Scotus had sent a note. He said to tell Joe Blackman that he says hello and to remind him to get a burger at Bob's Atomic Burgers in Golden.
All right. So, Bob's Atomic it is.
So when you're up there, just a heads up on the local recommendation.
I love it. Well, Shane, it's always good checking in with you. I feel like we need to do one of these every 6 weeks just to see what's going on the federal side of things, or even the state side, but just outside of the operations, more on the legislative side. So thank you for always being down to chat. And if there's any questions from the listeners, feel free to send them to myself or Shane, and we can definitely insert them into the next one of these calls that we have. And again, guys like Shane and myself, we're just here to add value and educate and advocate for those out there getting the work done for our community. So please reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. I think those questions or comments or requests for information would be great, because I find that so many of our colleagues are heads down doing all the important work they have to do every day.
Yep.
And then if they just want to ask us a question about something that it's not right in their cone, we can help them out with. I think we'd be happy to do that.
100%. All right. Well, all the listeners out there, make sure you share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. Shane, any final words before we get out of here? Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, you can contact me through my website at silsby-sa.com, or you can learn more about my book or just go through that to get to me. That's managingformeteors.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Make sure you like all of Joe Blackman's posts. And I think that's it.
All 5,000 of them. Yeah. If you want to learn more about me or get in touch, LinkedIn is usually the best place. Yeah, always looking to exchange DMs with new people and talk more about what's going on in the industry. So this has been another edition of the Public Works Podcast, and thank you everybody for tuning in.